Hey guys, my name's Epic. I'm a big fan of asymmetric horror games, and I've been playing Dead by Daylight for about 500 hours now. I started a couple months back, and I reached rank 1 as both survivor and killer. I originally got into the game when The Pig came out because Saw is my favorite horror movie franchise, and the idea of playing as the pig was something I thought I'd never get the chance to do. I've also recently gotten into the early access release of Monstrum 2. Throughout this video, I will be addressing Monstrum 2 as Monstrum just for convenience sake. I've played about 13 hours, and I understand most of the puzzles in the game. And so the reason for why I'm making this video is because I want to highlight all of the things that Monstrum does really well, and the things I wish DBD would do better, just for everybody to have a better gaming experience. Starting with horror, it is important to establish what that means. To me, it has two main components: fear and a lack of control. You require these two in specific because fear with control devolves into suspense. DBD attempts to be a horror game, but ends up in the suspense category due to the amount of control survivors have over the killer. This includes ballot stuns, decisive strike, borrowed time, the multitude of exhaustion perks, god pallets, god loops, flashlight saves, and the heavily survivor favorite maps. On the other hand, Monstrum has no interaction between the survivor and the killer outside of dying, blinding, and running away. There is a niche interaction with elevators, but even these can be circumvented with the right killer. Now we go into graphics, and by the industry standard, DBD has a very polished product. They have been reworking a multitude of maps, and on the graphics front, I think most players are very satisfied with these changes. Grass could be a bit better, but I think that's more of a nitpick on my part more than anything else. I do want to quickly mention the colorblind incident and the importance of listening to players, because dismissing them over problems that a vocal majority has been requesting for a long time is only going to drive them away from your game. Monstrum, on the other hand, does have a number of issues to address, and they are aware of them. The animations to break walls, running, and the sensation of being too light are all known facts that the devs have mentioned on their roadmap. The game is in early access, and I think it is only fair to give them the benefit of the doubt to get these points managed by full release. Even with all these visual inconveniences, I still think the game plays great, and the experience it offers is the most engaging of any asymmetrical horror game I've ever played. When addressing engaging gameplay, I will be having a baseline design philosophy of what I consider to be optimal and healthy variants. Survivors in DBD have two main objectives and a few other secondary ones. To escape, survivors have to power the exit gates via the generators and open them. Generators as they stand require little to no skill outside of having the patience to sit in front of your screen and click M1. A game of Candy Crush offers more engagement. The same could be said about 99ing the gates, since there are no repercussions, and this strategy essentially nullifies the whole point of having them in the first place. Secondary objectives like totems, healing, and unhooking are unfavored by survivors. They hate being forced to do totems because they feel the game is too easy for killers, but if they only do gens, then there's barely any interaction between the survivors and the killers. At that point, you might as well be playing a solo game. The overall game time can be spent doing these two objectives in two major ways. You can either immerse, act as if you were actually in a scary movie and afraid for your life and run away every time you hear the terror radius, or try to loop the killer. When you try to loop, there are two polar opposite scenarios, and we rarely ever see the middle point. Either the survivor is terrible and gets hit fast and early, or the survivor is really good and they will take the killer to a journey to Narnia and back while their teammates finish all of their gens uncontested. The game ought to be played is done by gen rushing, which is just playing the game for survivors, and then an actual toxic strategy. You can gen rush by splitting up and having a good looper, or by going as a trio to multiple gens across the map and having a good looper loop the killer. The thing is, survivors don't even have to play the game optimized, because the game is so heavily survivor-sided that they can get away with making tons of mistakes and still live, since the devs believe in the two escape and two sacrifice rule. On perks, survivors have Decisive Strike, Borrowed Time, Dead Hard, Unbreakable, and Object of Obsession as the blatantly broken abilities in the game. To the topic of Decisive Strike, the best perk in the game, being held hostage behind a paywall, not counting the Shrine of Secrets RNG, is another topic entirely worthy of its own video. Decisive Strike, from what I understand, was designed to be an anti-tunneling perk, and survivors have managed to turn it into a god mode of sorts, because the devs have allowed it. It stuns the killer for 5 seconds, but realistically, it adds 20 seconds since the killer has to regain their bearings and get back into chase. That's 20 seconds per player in the game, so for every DS, you have 80 seconds bonus time for other players to put pressure on the killer. Multiply DS by 4, since there is no cap on the number of repeated perks allowed to be brought to the game, and you have an extremely strong perk that the killer can do little about other than playing suboptimally. If I were to rework DS, I would make it so that the perk goes on cooldown if you do a gen, or get healed, or another survivor gets hooked, because the whole point of the perk is that you don't get tunneled and you didn't. Then we have Borrow Time, another anti-tunneling perk. In essence, I like it, but when I consistently see players going towards the killer, then there's an inherent problem with this perk. A semi-rework would be to change it so that you have to be hit on your back for the Borrow Time to work. Next, we have Dead Hard, designed to improve chases for survivors, but dedicated servers keep many players just downed and exhausted on the ground. The lack of consistency of this perk is extremely frustrating. I have no real change for this, other than having it work as it's supposed to. Easier said than done, and it's one of my smaller grievances, but one that I still think it's worthy of mentioning. Unbreakable is yet another incredibly frustrating perk, designed with good intention, but exploited and unchanged by devs that just don't seem to care. It is meant to be an anti-slug mechanic, but combined with Decisive Strike, it becomes another god mode where the killer gets punished if they pick you up, and they get punished if they don't. Schrodinger's hook, if you will. A way to balance both of these perks would be to give them an anti-tunnel debuff that only allows one anti-tunnel perk per game to activate, and stop people from bringing both DS and Unbreakable. Object of Obsession is a special one, because one of the devs has stated that it works as intended because the numbers don't show a lot of escapes with it. Now, I won't disagree with that statement, but is it good enough to consider the numbers in a vacuum? I'd say no. I care more about the design philosophy behind the perk and whether or not it's accomplishing it. I can't begin to imagine what the point of the perk is, because it's just immersion breaking and a balancing nightmare to have vision on the killer 100% of the time without an actual requirement that's challenging. A good Swift with Object of Obsession curve stomps any average to sub-average killer, and it has nothing to do with their level of skill. Leaving perks behind and going more into items, we are definitely starting with keys. I get out of jail free with 0 skill needed when you bring the tribute to spawn the hatch wherever you want. Keys need to take time to open, and a very challenging skill check at the very least. I would personally remove them altogether. If you didn't do the gens, you don't deserve to survive. It should be that simple. Medkits and an insta-heal add-ons are insane value. Even without the insta-heal, medkits are the second best item in the game because of how much pressure they allow survivors to apply to the killer by just hitting a skill check a few times. Toolboxes with brand new parts and Prove Thyself are just gen rushing on the mother of all steroids. Nothing will ever feel as disempowering than having 3 gens pop on you before hooking a single survivor. Altruism, for reasons that I imagine are stupid, is the highest rewarded objective in the game. Not the ability to beat the killer at the part of the game where the killer has an advantage. Not the part where you contribute the most to getting out of the game and surviving, but unhooking someone. I have been told that this is because they want to promote people to help each other, but if this does not promote getting me closer to my objective and takes 0 skill, why is the reward so big? I can't honestly tell you. I am of the belief that hard things should be rewarded more than easy things. To me, it's fairly basic. One of my favorite topics when it comes to survivors is toxicity. This community is the only one I've ever seen to rival League of Legends in this regard. Teabagging a killer is extremely disrespectful and immersion breaking. It is one of the additional reasons for why this game is not horror. It shows that you have so much control over the killer that you can flip him off and still get away with it. There is absolutely no fear in this survivor, but plenty of sewage. Some people might argue that teabagging isn't that bad, but I could argue that me giving the middle finger to those same critics is not that bad, and I assure you it would upset them, which at that point would just make them hypocrites. For this, I would suggest exhausting survivors from their base movement speed for X amount of time if they crouch more than 3 times in a row, or they crouch more than once after dropping a pallet. Before we move on from toxicity though, we can't forget flashlights. Clicky click, look at me, herder. That's what a lot of survivors in DBD do, and it's crazy how Monstrum figured out how to fix this problem in their early access, and DBD has yet to figure out how to deal with it. If you click the flashlight once, it should not work again after a while. Give them a penalty, and they will stop being rude. It's not that hard. Have you ever attempted to play DBD at night? The queue times for survivors are really long, like 5 minutes with a full swift long. Nobody wants to play killer because of all of the previous stated reasons. The game also has an extremely stale survivor meta that has not changed in I don't know how long. Now that we wrapped up survivors, we get to explore the killers. The whole appeal of this role is the power fantasy of being the monster of whatever licensed franchise you like, or just the experience of using powers against fearful survivors. That is not the experience you get in DBD, because of all of the previously stated survivor benefits. I do want to address one of the main issues that survivors have with killers that I actually do think is a relevant topic of discussion, and that is camping. Killers, as of right now, get rewarded for camping, even though it's an unfun gameplay for killers, because they do nothing but wait for hyper altruistic players. The problem with camping is that it makes it so that this one survivor hooked is unable to play the game, and that's just flawed game design. The simple solution to this basic problem is to stop the hook timer from going down if the killer is around the hooked survivor, if they are not in an active chase. Stupid survivors that loop the killer around the survivor that is hooked should get punished because that's just a misplay. One major point I want to highlight here is that it seems that the devs have been using a lot of perks as band-aids to haphazardly fix flawed game design, and the problem with that is that it's never going to be enough. Gen rushes early? Run corrupt intervention. Can't earn enough blood points to level up your characters? Run barbecue and chili every game. Perks should not be solutions to flawed game design. That should be your job in reworking the core gameplay experience. Perks should be fun new ways of playing the game, like deception and fake pallets. How could we ever forget about the Moris? Originally, the only counter to someone bringing the keys. They were definitely oppressive and worthy of a rework, but the new rework incentivizes zero usage, since you're better off running Putrid Oak than saving that one hook in the entire map. Killers should be able to Mori survivors on their second hook anyways, but Moris, as they are now, are just there to bloat up blood webs with more junk. Ruin Undying was the best solution to gen rushing, and it wasn't even an intended decision by the devs. The killers had a crutch, I will admit that much. The problem is it really fair to call 2 perks a crutch when survivors in total have more than 8, assuming everyone has borrowed time, decisive strike, and unbreakable? No, it only evened the playing field, and once again, killers get nerfed while survivors get off scuff-free. The last killer's rework leaves much to be desired, and shows the direction of the game. They took the worst killer in the game and gave him a flat buff, which he needed, and gave him a second ability that is almost always a waste of resources, which changes little to nothing of his gameplay. The lack of innovation and fear of change is making DBD not only bad, but even worse, boring. What about Monstrum? Well, for survivors, the initial puzzles are hard, and that's okay, or at least it should be. That's the point of a puzzle. YouTube will inevitably have solutions for those that want to have the answers now, and the challenge will remain for those that want to try to figure it out on their own. Entitled survivors that prefer to shove their entertainment down a gen and drool all over their keyboard for a full minute and a half only to be interrupted by skill checks every few seconds are the ones that annoy me. This is what gens should ultimately look like. Gens should cap out at 50% and then make survivors have to find parts to fix the gen completely. This game design makes it so that players have to move around and actually have a chance to encounter the killer and play the survivor horror instead of a metronome simulator. The maps here don't have palettes, but they have windows, crawl spaces, and alert doors. The looping here is more about stealth and running rather than sitting on a pallet waiting to stun the killer. The one critique I do have is that the items being removed from the game when you die is a buzzkill, and I prefer it if the items randomly spawn around the map after you died. On the killer side, Monstrum has less killers because it's a newer game. It is always going to have that disadvantage, so they have to make up for it in a different way. The tracking in DBD often feels stressful because survivors can mix their scratch marks with each other, and sometimes they go one way when the survivor went the other. In Monstrum, each killer has their own unique way of tracking, and so far, they are all pretty cool. I am personally in love with the Malakosm's tracking since I've never seen that implemented in any game ever. 2 out of the 3 killers in Monstrum have one-shot abilities, all 3 of them if you consider the Bagras Pounce. The melee one-shots are on very slow killers, and the Bagra takes a good amount of skill to land. Getting one-shot is scary. Scary is good if you want to make a horror game. You just have to make sure it's properly balanced. DBD and Monstrum have a similar but different game progression. DBD can be split into 2 halves, the exit gate powering and the opening of them. Gen jockey across the map, and there's little the killer can do about it. 99 the gates, and the game is free. The gates should regress like the gens. The fact that it doesn't is just honestly stupefying to me. A more unique aspect of DBD is that the game sessions have no expiration timer, so players can do whatever they want for as long as they want, as long as they're not sacrificed. There is no time pressure to do anything, outside of the endgame collapse, which only triggers after the survivors have opened the gates. Monstrum, on the other hand, has 3 stages. The power dynamics of each stage varies. Switches tend to be more survivor-sided, with a long duration due to the number of tasks. Powering the gen is extremely killer-sided, with a short duration due to the number of tasks, and leaving is slightly killer-sided due to the duration of the time commitment of each individual task. Monstrum has been able to create an ebb and flow that makes each distinct part feel different from each other while utilizing similar elements. On the point of time, Monstrum games always have a timer, so each player has the pressure to do something productive or they lose. So immersion is greatly dissuaded and fear is generated due to the countdown timer. Alfred Hitchcock figured it out forever ago. DBD just hasn't learned yet. On the topic of immersion, you always have lockers. In DBD, lockers serve one of 2 major purposes, and the fringe one that is fairly common. You can either immerse in one out of fear, insta-die when you get found when you use them poorly, or use them to counter the killer when they use barbecue and chili or anything of the sorts. Monstrum added one simple layer to this dynamic. You can choose where to exit, and if the killer chooses poorly, you get to live. It's a minor thing, but it adds so much more fun to lockers that I felt it was really important to address it. Something that isn't minor is the amount of time commitment you require to be able to have the full gameplay experience. DBD wants you hooked and playing nothing else, and it makes it impossibly hard to fully unlock everything because you need an incredible amount of in-game currency in order to even come close to having all of the perks. They want to make their blood webs a time sink where players are hooked forever with the sunken cost fallacy instead of actually making a better game. Imagine if the only requirement to get teachable perks in all of your characters at tier 3 was learning them at level 40, 45, and 50 instead of hemorrhaging blood points in every single character you want to play. Imagine getting bloody outfits on your survivors and killers if you did the Adept achievement instead of dumping hundreds of hours into the game. Reward your good players, not only the most time committed ones. Those are already playing your game. Speaking about rewards, DBD is reworking their rank system and they're giving away blood points. Iridescence? Not a chance. RX cells? You must be thinking of the mobile game, since they get RX cells all the time. Can you imagine if red ranks got iridescent rewards and rank 1s got RX cells? Can you imagine if they rewarded skill? Well, it seems I'm alone because I have yet to hear a single big streamer of this game say the same thing. Everyone seems to be happy with getting blood points. I refuse this notion. Your players deserve better. So far, everything in Monstrum is in-game currency, and all characters start the same, so there's nothing to talk about other than go in and have fun, as every game should be. The original HUD for DBD is as close to perfection as I've ever seen in any game. Clean information in 2 specific locations. The only change I would do would be to change the generic avatars with chalk iterations of each survivor in the game. It can be a bit immersion breaking, but it's cleaner. Then comes the DBD dev team, and they butcher their amazing HUD with widgets because reasons? They think widgets are the new thing, and they want it, based on what I've heard, for a competitive scene for the game. This game is far from being competitive ready. All that being said, they should at least offer legacy HUDs for those that just don't want their new abomination. One final note, if they are smart, selling perk reskins would be really good for the bottom line. For the Monstrum HUD, the HUD is clean, and there's not much else to say about it, so good job. Licensed Killers is really where DBD's bread and butter comes from. They get a really nice combination of power fantasy with nostalgia that is unique to this game, and they have milked it like no other. All the positives of this aside, DBD refuses to add monsters to their mix regardless of what fans want. Well, if DBD won't have non-humanoid monsters, then Monstrum should get those licenses and give those adorable abominations a new home. I can already see Alien crawling on the ceilings like the Bagara. When it comes to the player base and the genre, I think it's fair to say that DBD holds a monopoly. Scott Yund posted a video on why does DBD somehow work. I will link it below, but the TLDR is that new players take up the slots of old veteran players that leave because the game is so different that it attracts new players at the same rate as people figure out that the game is stupidly designed and leave as soon as they get good at it. I agree with what he says in regards to how people come and leave, but the idea that it's a good thing is what baffles me. No, as a developer, you want to keep both. You want to make money. You want to make a good new player experience and a veteran player experience. They are not mutually exclusive. Due to the clunky and suboptimal animations, a lot of players and streamers have decided to not give Monstrum a real chance, and that's a real shame, because it's a very enjoyable experience if you give it a chance. It isn't perfect, but it has given more signs of improvement in the last 3 months than DBD has in the last few years. That being said, Swifts are really important, so I hope they get this up and running as fast as possible. It hasn't been a major issue due to the small player base, but a good player base and Swift access is all this game needs right now, in my opinion. In conclusion, the message to behavior is, we deserve better, please do better. To Junkfish, I think you've got a great game, hope you stick the landing. To DBD players and streamers, if you complain that Decisive Strike is broken, that Dead Heart's broken, that BT is broken, that Ruin Undying is a pain, that Killer Camping is a problem, that keys are just obnoxious, that the hatch is a problem, that 99ing the exit gates is just unbearable, that the devs don't care about your opinion as long as they sell skins, try another game that has every single one of those issues fixed, and hopefully you have a better experience. If I missed any major point, please post it in the comment section and I'll update it on the description of the video later. If you liked what I had to say or want to debate any of these points, you can check me out on my stream, which I will also be linking below. Thank you for your time, and I hope we can all have fun playing the world's most intense game of tag together.